Jake Sullivan opened his eyes to complete darkness. His head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. The metal floor beneath him was cold and rough. He tried to move his arms, but they felt heavy and slow. Something was very wrong. The last thing Jake remembered was standing on the bridge of his ship. The Frontier's Edge had been investigating a distress signal near the Void Nebula. Then the alarm started screaming. Strange ships had appeared from nowhere and surrounded them. Before, Jake could give orders to his crew. Everything went black. Now he was somewhere else entirely. The air smelled different. It had a metallic taste that made his throat burn. Jake pushed himself up slowly. His body ached all over. As his eyes got used to the darkness, he could see he was in some kind of prison cell. The walls were made of dark metal with strange symbols carved into them. A weak blue light came from somewhere above. Jake looked around and saw he was not alone. Other creatures sat in the corners of the cell. They looked scared and tired. One of them moved closer to Jake. It was about his size but had green skin and 4 arms. Its eyes were large and yellow. When it spoke, Jake was surprised that he could understand the words. "You are awake," the creature said in a soft voice. "I thought you might be dead. The hunters hit you hard with their stunner." Jake touched the back of his head and felt a tender spot. "Where am I? What happened to my ship?" The green creature made a sad sound. "Your ship is gone. The hunters took what they wanted and destroyed the rest. You are on the arena ship now. My name is Kellex. I have been here for 3 cycles." "Arena ship?" Jake asked. Kellex moved closer and spoke in a whisper. "You have been captured by Zarethka. She is the most feared warrior in this part of space. She captures beings like us for her arena. We fight for the entertainment of others." Jake felt his stomach drop. He had heard stories about fighting pits in the outer colonies, but thought they were just rumors. "What kind of fights?" "Death fights," another voice said from the darkness. This one belonged to a tall, thin creature with silver skin. "Zarethka makes us fight each other. Sometimes she fights us herself. No one has ever beaten her. No one has ever even survived fighting her." Jake stood up and walked to the energy barrier that served as the cell door. Beyond it was a long corridor with more cells. He could see other prisoners in them. They all looked hopeless. "Tell me about this Zarethka," Jake said. Kellex came to stand beside him. "She is Catherian. They are reptile people from the core worlds. But she is different. She is bigger and stronger than most. She has been fighting in arenas for 20 years. Some say she has killed over 1,000 beings with her own claws." The silver creature joined them. "She studies every species she fights. She learns their weak spots. She knows how they think and how they move. By the time you face her, she already knows 10 ways to kill you." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "How many species has she fought?" "All of them," Kellex said. "Vorthan, warriors with their acid blood, Mektai soldiers with metal parts in their bodies. Even the Etherians who can move things with their minds, she has beaten them all." Jake thought about this. Every species had different strengths and weaknesses. If this Zarethka had fought them all and won, she must be incredibly smart as well, as strong. "What about humans?" Jake asked. "Has she ever fought a human before?" Both creatures looked at him with confusion. "Human?" the silver one asked. "We have never heard of your species. What sector are you from?" Jake realized that humans were unknown in this part of space. That might be the only advantage he had. If Zarethka had never studied humans before, she would not know what to expect. "How does the arena work?" Jake asked. Kellex sat down heavily. "New prisoners always fight her first. She likes to see what each species can do. Most die in the first few minutes. The lucky ones die quickly." "What if someone actually hurt her?" Jake asked. The silver creature made a harsh laughing sound. "Impossible. She has natural armor under her skin. Her claws can cut through metal. She moves faster than most beings can see, and she is smart. Very smart? Jake walked back to the far wall of the cell and sat down. He needed to think. He had been a Marine before becoming a ship captain. He had fought in 3 different colonial wars. He had survived situations that should have killed him. But this was different. This was fighting a creature that had spent 20 years becoming the perfect killer. As he sat there, more prisoners were brought to nearby cells. Jake watched as the guards pushed them roughly into their cages. The guards were big and mean-looking. But they were not Kitharian. They were some other species that worked for Zarethka. When do the fights happen? Jake asked. Every few days, Kellic said, when we reach a system with enough spectators. Rich beings from many worlds come to watch. They bet on how long each prisoner will last. Jake closed his eyes and tried to remember everything he knew about fighting. In the Marines, they had taught him that every opponent had weaknesses. The key was finding them before the opponent found yours. But how do you find the weakness of someone who has never lost? Hours passed. Jake learned more about his fellow prisoners. Kellic had been a traitor before his capture. The silver creature was named Vex and had been a soldier. There were others from different worlds and different backgrounds. All of them had one thing in common. They had given up hope. But Jake had not given up. He could not give up. Somewhere out there, human colonies were expanding into new sectors. Other humans might face the same fate if he did not find a way to stop this. He had to survive not just for himself, but for his species. The lights in the corridor grew brighter. Jake could hear the sound of heavy footsteps coming closer. The other prisoners moved to the back of their cells and tried to make themselves small. She comes, Kellic whispered. Zarethka comes to see the new arrivals. Jake stood up and moved to the energy barrier. If he was going to face this legendary killer, he wanted to see her first. He wanted to look into the eyes of the creature that had never known defeat. He wanted to understand what he was up against. The footsteps stopped in front of his cell. Jake found himself looking at the most dangerous being he had ever seen. Zarethka stood 7 feet tall in front of Jake's cell. Her scales were black as space and seemed to absorb the light around her. Yellow eyes studied him like he was already dead. Her claws were as long as kitchen knives and looked sharp enough to cut steel. She moved with the grace of a hunter who had never missed her prey. "So this is the unknown species," she said. Her voice was deep and had a strange musical quality to it. Small and weak-looking. No natural weapons. No armor. This will not take long. Jake stepped closer to the energy barrier. He looked directly into her eyes and did not look away. Most beings would have cowered in fear, but Jake had faced death before. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him afraid. Zarethka tilted, her head slightly. "Interesting. This one does not fear me yet. That will change very soon." She turned and walked away without another word. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor until they faded into silence. Jake realized he had been holding his breath. "You should not have looked at her like that," Kellic whispered. "She will remember. She will make your death slower because of it." Jake sat back down. "Tell me about the arena itself. What does it look like? What weapons are available?" Kellic looked confused. "Weapons? There are no weapons. Zarethka fights. With her natural abilities, the prisoners get nothing. What about the environment? Are there walls, obstacles, anything I can use?" Vex, the silver creature, moved closer. "The arena is circular, about 50 meters across. The walls are too high to climb and too smooth to grip. There is sand on the floor. Sometimes they put rocks or metal pieces in the center, but not always." Jake nodded. He was already forming a plan. It was not a good plan, but it was better than nothing. In the Marines, they had taught him to use every advantage, no matter how small. 2 days later, the guards came for him. They put energy shackles on his wrists and legs that would shock him if he tried to run. They led him through corridors filled with the sounds of thousands of creatures cheering and screaming for blood. The arena was exactly as Vex had described. The crowd was enormous and filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. They all wanted to see the unknown species die at the hands of their champion. Jake was pushed through a gate onto the sand. The crowd grew louder when they saw him. To them, he looked like easy prey. Small, soft, and defenseless. The perfect victim for their entertainment. Across the arena, another gate opened. Zarethka emerged and the crowd went wild. She raised her claws above her head and roared. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. She was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. Jake used the time to study the arena more carefully. There were indeed some metal pieces scattered in the sand, old weapons from previous fights that had been broken or discarded. He also noticed that the sand was deeper in some places than others. That might be useful. Zarethka began walking toward him slowly. She was not in a hurry. Why should she be? In her mind, the fight was already over. She had killed beings much larger and stronger than this small human. This would be nothing more than a brief exercise. "What are you called, little prey?" she asked as she got closer. "Jake Sullivan," he replied. "Captain Jake Sullivan." "Captain," she repeated with amusement. "You commanded others of your kind? That makes this even better. I will send a message to all humans when I kill their leader." Jake said nothing. He was watching her movements. Every step, every gesture, every shift in weight. In hand-to-hand combat, timing was everything. You had to read your opponent better than they read you. Zarethka stopped about 10 feet away. She crouched slightly and extended her claws. "I will make this quick, Captain. I am not cruel without reason." The fight began when Zarethka lunged forward with incredible speed. Her right claw swept toward Jake's throat in a move that had killed dozens of opponents before him. But Jake was not where she expected him to be. He had dropped to the ground and rolled to his left the instant she moved. Her claws cut through empty air where his head had been a second before. Jake came up from his roll and grabbed one of the broken metal pieces from the sand. Zarethka spun around to face him. Her yellow eyes showed surprise. Most beings froze when she attacked. They either stood still in fear or tried to block her claws with their bodies. This human had moved before she even finished her attack. "Lucky," she said, and attacked again. This time she came in low, trying to rake her claws across his legs to cripple him. Jake jumped backward and swung the metal piece like a club. It connected with her wrist and made her pull back her attack. The crowd grew quieter. This was taking longer than usual. Zarethka reset her stance and studied Jake more carefully. He was fast for his size and seemed to know how to fight. But he was still just a small human with a piece of scrap metal. She feinted left, then attacked right. Jake fell for the feint and moved the wrong way. Her claws raked across his shoulder and drew first blood. The crowd cheered as red blood splattered onto the sand. Jake stumbled but did not fall. The cuts were deep and painful, but not life-threatening. He used his momentum to move further away and give himself time to think. Zarethka looked at the blood on her claws and smiled. "Your blood is red like the Altarians. Interesting. I wonder if your bones break the same way theirs do." She came after him again, but this time Jake was ready. Instead of trying to avoid her completely, he stepped into her attack at the last second. Her claws passed over his head as he ducked low and drove his shoulder into her midsection. Zarethka was not expecting the contact. She was used to opponents who tried to stay away from her. This human was actually trying to get close. The impact knocked her back a step and gave Jake the opening he needed. He grabbed her left wrist with both hands and twisted hard. For the first time in years, Zarethka felt real pain shoot up her arm. She roared in anger and backhanded Jake across the face with her free hand. Jake flew backward and hit the sand hard. His vision blurred and he tasted blood in his mouth. But he had accomplished something important. He had hurt her. Not badly, but enough to show that she was not invincible. The crowd was completely silent now. No one had ever made Zarethka show pain before. Even the arena workers had stopped what they were doing to watch. Zarethka shook her injured wrist and glared at Jake. "You have made me bleed, human. That has not happened in 5 years. I will remember your name when I tell others how you died." Jake wiped blood from his mouth and stood up. He was tired and hurt, but far from finished. The fight's not over yet. For the next several minutes, they circled each other carefully. Zarethka was no longer treating this as easy entertainment. She was fighting seriously now, using techniques she had developed over 20 years of combat. But Jake was adapting too. Every attack she made taught him something about her fighting style. She favored her right claw for killing strikes. She always moved to her left after a failed attack. She had incredible reflexes, but there was a tiny delay between her decision to attack and her actual movement. Jake began to time his counters to that tiny delay. When she committed to an attack, he was already moving to avoid it. When she expected him to retreat, he pressed forward. When she thought he would go high, he went low. The fight lasted longer than any previous battle in the arena's history. Both fighters were bleeding now. Both were breathing hard. The crowd watched in fascination as their unbeatable champion struggled against an opponent who should have died in the first exchange. Finally, Zarethka made a mistake. She overextended on a killing thrust, and Jake managed to get behind her. For just a moment, he had a clear shot at her neck. One good strike with the metal piece could end the fight. But instead of taking the killing blow, Jake hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Zarethka spun around and knocked him to the ground. Her claws were at his throat before he could move. The fight was over. Jake had survived longer than anyone in arena history, but he had still lost. The crowd waited for Zarethka to finish him, but she did not strike the final blow. Instead, she stared down at him with confusion in her yellow eyes. "Why?" she asked quietly. "You had the chance to kill me. Why did you not take it?" Jake looked up at her and smiled despite the pain. "Because killing you wouldn't have solved anything. There would just be another arena and another champion. The cycle would continue." Zarethka stood up slowly. The crowd was screaming for her to finish the human, but she ignored them. Something had changed during this fight. For the first time in 20 years, she had faced an opponent who could have killed her but chose not to. Zarethka walked away from Jake without delivering the killing blow. The crowd screamed in anger and confusion. This had never happened before. Their champion always finished her opponents. Always. Guards came onto the arena floor and dragged Jake back to the medical bay. This was also unprecedented. Losers in the arena were usually left to die in the sand. But Zarethka had given specific orders. The human was to be healed and returned to his cell. Jake woke up 3 days later with bandages covering his shoulder and a strange taste in his mouth from alien medicine. His cell was the same, but everything else had changed. The other prisoners looked at him with something new in their eyes. "Hope, you survived," Kellex whispered when the guards were gone. "No one has ever survived fighting Zarethka before." Jake sat up slowly. His body still ached, but the pain was manageable. "I didn't win. She could have killed me easily at the end." "But she did not," Vex said from his corner. "That means something. In 20 years, she has never shown mercy to anyone." Over the next few days, Jake learned that his survival had changed the atmosphere on the entire ship. Guards were more nervous. Prisoners whispered among themselves instead of sitting in silent despair. Even the arena staff seemed unsure of what to do next. Zarethka came to visit Jake's cell several times. She would stand outside the energy barrier and study him like he was a puzzle she could not solve. Sometimes she asked questions about human culture and fighting techniques. Other times, she just watched him in silence. "Your species fights differently than others," she said during one visit. "Most beings rely on their natural advantages: strength, speed, claws, poison. You use your mind as a weapon." Jake looked up from the small exercises he had been doing to stay in shape. "Every species has advantages. Humans learn to use our brains because we don't have much else." "Your brain," Zarethka repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I have been studying. Recordings of our fight. You were thinking several moves ahead, planning for possibilities I had not even considered." She moved closer to the barrier. "Tell me about your military training." Jake was surprised by the question. "How do you know I had military training?" "The way you move, the way you assess threats. You are not just a ship captain. You are a soldier." Jake decided there was no point in hiding it. "I was a Marine for 8 years before I got my own ship. I fought in 3 colonial wars." "Wars," Zarethka said with interest. "Your species fights wars against itself?" "Sometimes. We also fight together against common enemies. It depends on the situation." Zarethka was quiet for a long time after that. Jake could see her thinking about something important, but he did not know what. A few days later, she returned with more questions. "In your wars, did you ever fight opponents who were stronger than you?" "All the time," Jake replied. "The key is not to fight their strengths. You find their weaknesses and exploit them. And if they have no obvious weaknesses," Jake smiled. "Everyone has weaknesses. Sometimes you have to create them." Zarethka's yellow eyes narrowed. "Explain." "You make them angry so they make mistakes. You tire them out with hit-and-run attacks. You attack their confidence instead of their body. There are many ways to defeat a stronger opponent." For the first time since Jake had known her, Zarethka looked uncertain. "In the arena, I am always the stronger opponent." Jake stood up and walked to the barrier. "Are you? Or do you just believe you are because no one has ever challenged that belief?" The question seemed to disturb her. She left without saying another word. Jake began using his time to study the other prisoners more carefully. He learned their backgrounds, their skills, and most importantly, their fears. Most of them had given up, but Jake thought they could be motivated if given the right reason: to fight. He started teaching them things the guards did not notice: hand signals for silent communication, basic tactical movements disguised as exercises, ways to judge distances and timing without seeming to measure anything. Kellex was the first to understand what Jake was doing. "You are preparing us for something." "Maybe," Jake said quietly. "If the opportunity comes, would you rather die fighting for freedom or die for someone else's entertainment?" The question spread through the prison cells like a virus. Prisoners who had not spoken to each other in months began having whispered conversations. They began to remember who they were before they became victims. Vex joined the training after a week, then others. Soon, Jake had 12 prisoners learning human combat techniques adapted for their different species and abilities. 2 weeks after Jake's fight with Zarethka, she announced something that had never happened before: a special tournament. 10 prisoners would fight her at the same time. If any survived, Jake would face her again in single combat. The crowd that gathered for this event was 3 times larger than normal. Word had spread across multiple star systems about the human who had made Zarethka show mercy. Beings traveled from distant worlds to see what would happen next. Jake used the time before the fight to organize the other prisoners into a real fighting unit. "Remember, we are not trying to kill her. We are trying to prove that she can be beaten." "What is the difference?" asked Kellex. "If we try to kill her, she will fight like a cornered animal. If we try to defeat her, she might learn something about herself." The 10 prisoners entered the arena together. For the first time in years, they walked with their heads held high. They had a plan, and they had trained for this moment. Zarethka entered from the opposite side. She looked confident, but Jake could see signs of tension in her posture. This was not a normal fight for her either. "Which of you wishes to die first?" she called out. Instead of answering, the prisoners spread out in a formation Jake had taught them. They did not attack immediately. They waited and watched, forcing Zarethka to make the first move. She charged toward the weakest-looking prisoner, a small furry being named Tick. But as she committed to the attack, the other prisoners moved, according to Jake's plan. 3 of them flanked her while the rest cut off her escape routes. For the first time in her fighting career, Zarethka found herself surrounded by opponents who were working together. She killed Tick with her first strike, but immediately found herself under attack from multiple directions. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Prisoners fell one by one, but each death cost Zarethka time and energy. More importantly, each exchange taught the remaining fighters something about her techniques. By the time only 3 prisoners remained, Zarethka was bleeding from dozens of small wounds. None of them were serious, but they were slowing her down. She was also breathing hard from the constant movement and fighting. Kellex, Vex, and 1 other prisoner had her cornered against the arena wall. For just a moment, it looked like they might actually defeat her. The crowd held its breath in absolute silence. Then Zarethka roared with fury and unleashed a series of attacks so fast and vicious that all 3 remaining prisoners fell within seconds. She stood alone in the center of the arena, wounded and exhausted but victorious. However, something important had changed. She had been pushed to her limits. She had been hurt, tired, and for a brief moment, genuinely threatened. The myth of her invincibility had been cracked, even though she had won. As the medical teams cleared the bodies from the arena, Zarethka looked up at Jake, who was watching from the prisoner viewing area. Her yellow eyes held a question she could not voice in front of the crowd. Jake nodded slightly. He understood what she was asking. Yes, he had seen her struggle. Yes, he knew she was not the invincible force she pretended to be. And yes, when they fought again, he would use everything he had learned. The guards came for Jake that night. His second battle with Zarethka would happen in 3 days. But this time, it would be different. This time, she would be fighting an opponent who had seen behind her mask of invincibility. This time, Jake thought he might actually have a chance to win. Zarethka stood alone in her private quarters, staring at her reflection in the polished metal wall. For 20 years, she had seen herself as the perfect predator, unstoppable, unbeatable, unchanging. Now she saw something different. She saw doubt. The human had done something to her that no opponent had ever managed. He had made her question who she was, not just as a fighter, but as a being. Before Jake Sullivan, she had not thought about her life before the arena for many years. Now she could not stop thinking about it. She remembered being young Zarethka Veltar, daughter of a minor noble house on Kitharos Prime. She had loved art and music. She had been curious about other cultures and had dreamed of traveling among the stars as an explorer, not a killer. That girl had died the day she was sold to pay her family's debts, or so Zarethka had believed. But Jake's questions had awakened something she thought was gone forever. The memory of who she had been before she became what she was now. Her door chimed, and Vex Moradin entered without waiting for permission. The crime lord was a bloated creature from the Plutonian system with too much money and too little conscience. He owned the arena ship and everyone on it, including Zarethka. "My champion seems troubled," he said in his wet, unpleasant voice. "The spectators are talking. They say you looked weak during the group fight." Zarethka did not turn around. "I won. That is what matters." "Is it?" Vex moved closer, his many fat tentacles leaving slime trails on the floor. "You were supposed to kill them quickly and efficiently. Instead, you gave them hope. Hope is bad for business." "The human will die in 3 days," Zarethka said. "That should satisfy your customers." Vex laughed, a sound like bubbling acid. "Will he? You had the chance to kill him in your first fight, but you did not. You brought him back to life when you could have let him die. Now he has trained the other prisoners to fight better. You are becoming soft, my dear." Zarethka finally turned to face him. Her yellow eyes were cold as space. "I am not soft. I am curious. This human interests me." "Your curiosity is costing me money," Vex said. "Rich beings come here to see death, not mercy. If you cannot provide what they want, I will find someone who can." The threat was not empty. Vex had other fighters, including some who had been enhanced with technology and combat drugs. They were not as skilled as Zarethka, but they were completely obedient. More importantly, they would kill without hesitation or question. "What do you want from me?" Zarethka asked. "Kill the human publicly and brutally," Vex said. "Make an example of him. Show the galaxy that mercy is weakness, and that you are still the perfect killer they expect you to be." After Vex left, Zarethka went to the observation deck where she could look out at the stars. She often came here when she needed to think. Tonight she was thinking about choices. For 20 years, she had told herself that she had no choices. She was a prisoner, just like the beings she fought. She killed because she had to, not because she wanted to. It was survival, nothing more. But Jake had shown her that even in the worst situations, you still had choices. He could have killed her when he had the chance. He chose mercy instead. That choice had changed everything. Jake was brought to her quarters the next day under heavy guard. This was another unprecedented event. Champions and prisoners never met privately. But Zarethka had demanded it, and Vex had agreed, probably hoping she would kill Jake early and end the disruption he was causing. "You know about my past," Zarethka said when they were alone. It was not a question. Jake nodded. "I've been asking questions. The older prisoners remember stories about a young Catherian noble who was sold into slavery. They didn't know it was you until I described some things you said. What else do they know? That you were different when you first arrived. You cried after your early fights. You tried to help wounded opponents instead of finishing them. You only became the perfect killer after years of having no other choice." Zarethka was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than Jake had ever heard it. "I had a younger brother named Kelth. He loved to paint. I wonder if he is still alive." "Why don't you find out?" Jake asked. "Because I am not Zarethka Veltar anymore. I am the huntress of the arena. I am a killer who has murdered hundreds of innocents for entertainment. My brother would not want to see what I have become." Jake leaned forward. "But what if you could become someone else? What if you could choose to be different?" "It is too late for that," Zarethka said. "I have done too much, killed too many. There is no going back." "There is always a choice," Jake said firmly. "You taught me that. When you spared my life, you made a choice. You proved that the killer is not all you are." Their conversation was interrupted when alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Emergency. Lights flashed red, and the voice of the ship's computer announced that they were under attack by patrol vessels from the Galactic Council. Jake smiled grimly. "I should probably tell you something. Before my ship was captured, I sent a message to Human Military Command with our location and what we had discovered. It took them a while to organize a response, but they found us." Zarethka stared at him. "You planned this." "I planned for the possibility. Humans don't abandon their own. If there was any chance I was still alive, they would come looking." The ship shook as weapons fire struck the hull. Through the viewport, Jake could see the sleek shapes of human destroyers moving in attack formation. They were supported by ships from other species that belonged to the Council's peacekeeping force. "Your escape pod bay is being evacuated," Jake said. "Vex is probably already gone. Most of the crew will surrender rather than die for his profits. This ship is finished." Zarethka looked around her quarters at the only home she had known for 20 years. Everything that had defined her existence was ending. She should have been afraid or angry. Instead, she felt something she had not experienced in decades. She felt free. "What will happen to me?" she asked. Jake stood up as the guards who had brought him came running back. In the chaos of the attack, they were more concerned with escaping than watching prisoners. "That depends on what you choose to do next," Jake said. "You can go down fighting as the arena champion. You can try to escape and continue your old life. Or you can help me free the remaining prisoners and face whatever consequences come after." Zarethka made her decision. She walked to a hidden panel in her wall and removed something Jake had never seen before. It was a data crystal containing detailed information about Vex's criminal operations, his business partners, and the locations of other arena ships throughout the sector. "This has everything the Council will need to shut down the entire network," she said, handing it to Jake. "I have been keeping records for years, waiting for the right moment." "Why?" "Because even killers can dream of redemption," she said quietly. "I just never thought I would live long enough to see it." The ship lurched violently as more weapons fire found their mark. Through the chaos and noise, Jake could hear the sounds of prisoners being evacuated and guards surrendering. The arena, that had seemed so permanent and indestructible, was falling apart around them. "We need to get to the escape pods," Jake said. Zarethka nodded, but first she did something that surprised him. She went to a small shrine in the corner of her quarters and picked up a tiny painted figure of a young Cytherian male. Her brother's artwork, kept safe for 20 years. "Now I am ready," she said. Together, they ran through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the arena died in the vacuum of space, taking its legacy of death and suffering with it. Jake and Zarethka ran through the dying ship as explosions shook the hull around them. Emergency lights flickered and died, leaving sections of corridor in complete darkness. The air tasted of smoke and fear. They reached the prisoner levels to find chaos. Some guards had fled, others were trying to maintain order long enough to evacuate safely. Prisoners who had been locked away for years were suddenly free and did not know what to do with their freedom. The escape pods are this. "Way!" Zarethka shouted over the noise of failing systems and distant weapons fire. But Jake stopped running. "We can't leave the others." "The ship is dying," Zarethka said. "If we do not reach the pod soon, we will die with it." Jake looked at the confused prisoners stumbling through the corridors. Many of them were weak from poor food and lack of exercise. Others were injured from their time in the arena. Without help, most would never make it to safety. "Then we help them," Jake said firmly. "No one gets left behind." Something changed in Zarethka's expression when she heard those words. For 20 years, her survival had depended on leaving others behind, on being stronger, faster, and more ruthless than everyone around her. The idea of risking her life for beings she barely knew was completely foreign to her nature as a killer. But it was not foreign to her nature as Zarethka Veltar. "You are right," she said quietly. "We help them." They split up to cover more ground. Jake took the prisoners who could walk and organized them into groups moving toward the escape pods. Zarethka used her knowledge of the ship to find the ones who were trapped or lost. The ship's computer announced that hull breaches had been detected in multiple sections. Life support was failing. They had minutes, not hours. Jake reached the pod bay to find it already crowded with prisoners, crew members, and a few guards who had decided surrender was better than death. The bay could hold everyone, but the pods were designed for short trips, to nearby ships, not long journeys through space. "The human fleet is close," one of the surrendering guards told Jake. "They are preparing to take survivors aboard their ships." Jake helped load the weakest prisoners into the first wave of pods. As each one launched toward the safety of the rescue ships, he felt a small sense of victory. These beings would live to see their home worlds again. Zarethka arrived with the last group of prisoners just as the ship's computer announced catastrophic system failures. The arena ship was breaking apart under the combined damage from the attack and its own failing systems. "Get them into the pods," Jake ordered. But there was a problem. There were more survivors than remaining pods. Someone would have to stay behind, or the pods would be too crowded to launch safely. Jake looked around the bay at all the beings they had saved. Dozens of different species who had been condemned to die for entertainment were now free. He had accomplished what he set out to do. His mission was complete. "I'll stay," he said simply. "No," Zarethka said immediately. "I will stay. This is my ship, my responsibility." "Your responsibility is to make sure that Data Crystal reaches the Council," Jake said. "Without it, other arenas will continue to operate. More beings will suffer the way these ones did." The ship lurched violently as another section exploded. Time was running out. "There is another way," Zarethka said suddenly. She moved to a control panel and began entering commands with her claws. "I can override the safety systems and launch all remaining pods simultaneously. The bay doors will stay open long enough for everyone to escape." Jake realized what she was planning. "That will flood this section with vacuum. You won't survive." "I know," Zarethka said calmly. She finished, entering the commands and turned to face him. "But everyone else will." For the first time since Jake had known her, Zarethka looked completely at peace. The doubt and pain that had haunted her for weeks was gone. She had found her redemption. "Tell them," she said, handing him the data crystal. "Tell the Council that Zarethka Veltar died trying to save lives instead of taking them." The evacuation alarm began sounding. Jake was pushed toward one of the pods by other survivors, but he fought his way back to Zarethka. "Come with us," he said desperately. "There has to be another way." She smiled at him, and for a moment he could see the young noble she had been, before the arena consumed her life. "You taught me that everyone has choices, Jake Sullivan. This is mine." The last pods launched into space, carrying their precious cargo of freed prisoners. Jake watched through the small viewport as the arena ship broke apart behind them. The vessel that had brought death to so many beings across the galaxy died in a spectacular explosion that lit up the darkness of space. But from that destruction came something new. Hope. 3 months later, Jake stood before the full assembly of the Galactic Council on Centauri Prime. The data crystal Zarethka had given him had led to the discovery and destruction of 7 other arena ships. Hundreds of prisoners had been freed and returned to their home worlds. Vex Morodin and his associates were in prison awaiting trial for crimes against multiple species. The underground fighting circuit that had operated in secret for decades was finally broken. "Captain Sullivan," the council chairman said, "your actions have saved countless lives. The beings of the galaxy owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Jake thought about Zarethka and the choice she had made in her final moments. "I didn't do it alone, sir. I had help from someone who proved that anyone can change if they choose to." After the ceremony, Jake returned to his new ship and his crew. They had a mission to explore the unknown regions of space and make contact with new civilizations. It was the job he had always wanted. But sometimes, late at night, when he looked out at the stars, Jake wondered about something. The explosion that destroyed the arena ship had been massive, but escape pods were designed to survive almost anything. The rescue teams had recovered dozens of pods from the debris field. Most contained the prisoners and crew they expected to find. But one pod had been empty except for a small painted figure of a young Catherian male. The rescue team had assumed it was just debris that had floated into the pod during the explosion. Jake kept that small figure on his desk as a reminder of the warrior who had learned that true strength came not from killing, but from choosing to protect others. He liked to think that somewhere in the galaxy, a former arena champion was starting a new life as the person she had always been meant to be. The arena was dead, Its legend of invincibility was broken. And for the first time in 20 years, beings across multiple star systems could sleep peacefully, knowing that none would survive her arena, because there was no arena left to survive. But the galaxy was a big place, and Jake Sullivan knew that humans had only just begun to explore it. There would be other challenges, other battles, other beings who needed help, and when those moments came, humanity would be ready. They would show the galaxy what it meant to fight not just for survival, but for something greater. They would show them what it meant to be human.